So, Cheryl, whenever you're ready, we can move on to you.
Another Cheryl. This time,
Yes, even
Cheryl with an S this time. In that last presentation, every time somebody mentioned Cheryl's name, it's like I'm on. It's like, oh, am I on now? Anyway, here I am, and it's great to follow up because I'm only going to talk for 15 minutes. And so we can piggyback on what has already been said, this great presentation I'm following, because there's much overlap, of course, because my talk is just on how to make your online class accessible to students with disabilities. And guess what? We do a lot of presentations in our classes. And so those of you that were in that presentation have a lot of background now, but I'm also going to deliver this in such a way that you don't have to have listened to that one to follow along with this one. So I'm Sheryl Burgstahler. I work at the University of Washington, and my pronouns are she and her. I direct the Accessible Technology Services Organization, which has two groups. The IT Accessibility Team, which started in 1984, much smaller, much narrower focus, where we make sure that the technology that is procured, developed, and used at the University of Washington is accessible to faculty, students, and staff who have disabilities and everybody else. That's all funded by the University of Washington. Back in 1992, I started the Do It Center, which stands for Disabilities, Opportunities, Internetworking, and Technology. I looked around campus. I wanted to do more things related to accessibility. And I realized that a lot of people that live their passion get their own money. And so I started grant writing in a big way. Most of our funding comes from the National Science Foundation. So we do a lot of outreach and activities for faculty and practitioners in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We also get money from the U.S. Department of Education, the Department of Labor, the state of Washington, corporate funds, private funds, you name it. And so that allows us to do a lot more than we could do if we were just relying on UW funds. We even have a Do It Center in Japan at the University of Tokyo, started in 2007, and a Center on Universal Design and Education, which started in 1999 and continues to be updated with the new grants that we get every year. So let's start. I want to say what I think about when I think of an inclusive environment of any type. It means that everyone who meets the requirements, with or without accommodations, is encouraged to participate, right? Okay. Once they get there, they feel welcome. If your little introductory video in your online course doesn't have captions, there might be a student in that class who does not feel welcome if those captions aren't accurate. And many people that even put their little videos up on YouTube don't realize they can go in and edit those captions and make them accurate. Also benefits English language learners, besides students who are deaf. And everyone is fully engaged in accessible and inclusive activities. And so that's what I'm talking about here. A couple of things to know about disabilities that many of you already know, but most disabilities are not obvious to others. So we don't necessarily know who in our class has a disability by looking at our little Zoom pages or across the room if we're on site. And add to that, fewer than 1/3 of students with disabilities report them to the Disability Services Office. Why? Well, you'd have to ask them, frankly. It's a personal decision. But what's been reported to me many times is students still worry about being discriminated against. They don't know how you're going to accept them as a full-fledged 100% student if they have a learning disability or a mental illness or some other type of disability. So they don't request accommodations. And those disability services offices on our campuses tend to primarily provide accommodations after the fact. So they're working with this individual after an inaccessibility has been discovered. This seems like a very inefficient way to do things. And so it's important to consider intersectionality, which complicates matters. If someone has multiple disabilities or a disability with another underrepresented status, that can get complicated. And so I'm promoting that we use the framework called universal design, which is the design of products and environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. Like Sheryl with the C said, there are a lot of things you can do proactively to make your presentation accessible. Someone might still need to request an accommodation for a conference, like a sign language interpreter, but at least you've given some thought to make your offering as accessible as possible. So we want to do the same thing with online courses. So what are characteristics of a universally designed product, including an online course? Everything is accessible. That means technically a person with a disability can use it, but it's also usable and that it's easy to maneuver around in your class and people can find what they need and things are in logical order and so forth. And inclusive, that for the most part, all the students in the class are using the same products, but there's built-in flexibility in the assignments and the presentations and the resources, so everyone can learn how they learn best. An example of universal design is our smartphones, where we can change the color of the background and the text and change the size of the text and so forth. All these features that are built in for flexibility of our iPhones were originally assistive technologies that might be interfaced with the computer. So they were specifically designed for people with disabilities. Now we're just building in these things. And when we build in these features, then I would call that universal design. And we also make sure that our technology is compatible with other assistive technology a person with a disability might be using. I just have a few minutes here, but I always encourage people to look at the characteristics of the students that might be in their class and that what the assistive technology is that they might be using. You can never become an expert on assistive technology unless you are in that field already, or you're going to make a career change, or you're going to spend a lot of your extra hours working in this area. It's very exciting, by the way, but there are thousands and thousands of devices that help people with disabilities make use of computers. And of course, some better than others. But if I think about these 4 students when I'm designing an online course, they make it accessible to them. It's going to be accessible to a lot of other people as well. Zane is deaf, and so she's a constant reminder we need to make sure that we have accurate captions throughout the course when we use videos or transcripts of audio files. Anthony has multiple physical disabilities. He uses tons of assistive technology. But the main thing we need to know in development is his assistive technology can do everything that other people can do with their keyboard alone, but they don't emulate the mouse, or at least the mouse very well. And so when designers are creating a website, for instance, they need to make sure that the user can operate it with the keyboard alone. And then Anthony will have access to it. And so you can even test your own website by just setting aside your mouse and using the arrow keys and see if you can maneuver around your website. And then you know whether it's accessible to Anthony. Jessie has multiple learning disabilities. And the big issue for her is that, as far as access, is she uses text-to-speech technology, similar to screen readers that people who are blind use, because she has dyslexia, which makes it difficult, very slow to read, but she can comprehend a lot better and read a lot faster if she has the computer read aloud to her the text that's presented on the screen. And so we need to make sure that if it's a PDF file or an image of some sort, that she has access to the text, the underlying text. So a scanned in image, which many PDFs are, her text-to-speech software is not going to work. And so she'll need to have an accommodation through the Disability Services Office. Hadi is blind and he has similar issues. He needs access to the text as well. But as we learned in the last presentation a bit too, is that his documents need to be formatted in a certain way as well. The tables, the lists, the heading structure, to make sure that his screen reader can tell him that a list is coming up, or this is a heading 3 rather than heading 2. Otherwise, if there's no formatting, he might read a 25-page document like it's just one big mass of words. You can imagine how difficult that would be to parse out. Kind of think about people like that. In a nutshell, then, what universal design requires that you do if you're teaching a class is provide multiple ways for participants to learn and to demonstrate what they're learning and to engage. As far as learning, you might use a video and then maybe a document to read or a website page to read. So there are multiple ways that the student can learn. But then you have to look at number 2 here. Number 2 says that you need to ensure that all the technologies, the facilities, the services, resources, the strategies are accessible to individuals with a wide variety of disabilities. So looking back at my first example then, you're using a video and you're using a document. The second requirement means that the video should be accurately captioned and the document should be in an accessible format. So it's not enough just to have the choices that maybe an individual person can choose one or the other. You need to make them as accessible as possible so a person can use both of them. Maybe that's how they learn best. So here are some other tips. Using large sans serif fonts on uncluttered pages, plain backgrounds, high contrast. Use clear, consistent layouts and organizational schemes. Use a text format, structured headings and lists, tables, so forth. You'll have to learn how to do that, but I'm going to show you how to learn about it real easily in a minute. Use descriptive wording for hyperlinks. As was mentioned in the last presentation, you can, or Hadi could scan through his website and go link to link, because he might want to know, what is this website or content in my management system? What's linked from this page? And if you just put click here or here for every single one of them, which maybe looks kind of neat because it's all consistent, that's what he hears. He hears click here, click here, click here. So what does he have to do? He has to go back and read the surrounding text before he can figure out what's at the end of that link. It's real easy to do when you're developing something, a content page, for instance, but it takes a little work if you have to go back and fix it later, like most things. PDFs, I encourage faculty to avoid them unless they invest a little time in learning how to make them accessible. But it can be a little tricky. The rules are a little different between Macintosh and PC, and some things work with this and that and so forth. So as an online instructor, I just avoid them. It's best to put your content within the learning management page, which is HTML, the language of the web, for formatting. But even Word documents or PowerPoints are much easier to make accessible than PDFs. Some other tips: caption your videos. We already talked about that. Address a range in language skills. Use plain English. It's hard for us sometimes when we're teaching about something we know something about. But we have to remember our students don't. And so don't unnecessarily make things complex, your sentences or even the words that you're using. Spell out and define acronyms. That's a problem many people have in presentations and so forth. We know what it's like when they throw up an acronym and you don't know what it is. And if you knew a lot about that content, maybe you wouldn't be in that presentation or in that class. And then also to say what jargon you might be using, because somebody might be from a different culture. I use the expression low-hanging fruit a lot when I'm talking about accessible web design. What's something easy you can do? The first time I use it in a class, I always define it. I just say, well, what I mean by low-hanging fruit is, I don't know if anybody doesn't know what that expression means, but it only takes one sentence to clear up that problem. Make sure that the instructions and the expectations are clear. I get a lot of complaints about clarity from students who are on the autism spectrum and students with some types of learning disabilities. So it's really important to just be really clear. And also when students ask for clarification on an assignment, look back at that and see if you could have said that in a little different way the next time you teach the class. And so it might not be confusing because somebody else might have the same problem. Provide adequate time for assignments and feedback on parts and corrective opportunities when possible. I always put my assignments very specifically laid out in the syllabus. That makes students have a lot of time to be thinking ahead on what they're going to be doing so they can schedule their time. Maybe they have a lot of free time over Thanksgiving. You don't know that. But why not give them all those assignments and they can work ahead? Once you know the basic accessibility issues we're talking about today, then you can understand and use the accessibility checkers in Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, learning management systems, and other applications. So I'm going to end with some resources. I mentioned at the beginning, we have the Center for Universal Design and Education, the foundation for all that I've talked about today. That's at uw.edu/DOIT/CUDE. And within that area, you're going to find the 20 tips for teaching an accessible online course. I gave a few of the tips out, but I gave about half of them out, I think. But you can find that document. And in the document, for each one of those tips, it tells you how to do it. And it does have things like color choices and so forth for people who are colorblind and things, sorts of things. And so I'd encourage you to look for that document. You can look at it in the Center for Universal Design and Education, or it's very popular. So if you just Google 20 tips online, it'll probably be the first thing that you'll get on your Google list. I've also written a book you might want to take a look at, Creating Inclusive Learning Opportunities in Higher Education, a Universal Design Toolkit. Practical tips for any campus that wants to make everything they do universally designed. So again, I'm Sheryl Burgstahler, Sheryl with an S, SHERYLB at uw.edu. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for a wonderful presentation. Now I'm going to move to the Q&A to see if we have any questions, which doesn't look like we have right now, but usually it takes a few moments for people to start putting ideas in. So if there's anything that you are excited about, any new projects or anything, I would love for you to talk about that as we wait for Q&A questions to start
Yeah.
coming in.
Well, I'm going to answer the most common question I get in presentations like this, and they're usually quite a bit longer, by the way. But wow, you presented a lot of information. This is overwhelming. Where do I get started, or how do I find the time to do this? When I talk to faculty, I always encourage them to start somewhere, somewhere. Maybe something that's kind of interesting to you, like videos. Like, oh, hey, I've got a lot of videos. I can get in and edit those captions, or another, or documents. The other way you can look at another angle is just to go through that whole list when you get the document of 20 tips and just start circling things and think, oh, I can do that. I can do that. Like maybe fix all of your clicks to, or your links to websites to get the content in, or the alternative text on images. Pick something, but start somewhere. Another one is to think about the first week or two in your class, because if your first week or two, if they're really accessible, then at least the student has some time to work with the Disability Services Office to get the rest of the things made more accessible.
How do you make sure that you don't leave any students behind? Even if they, for example, might not have disabilities and might, I'm imagining specifically like PDFs versus HTML. If they prefer one way or another, how do you make sure that everyone gets proper access?
Well, if you use HTML, that's a pretty safe way to go, as long as you use the built-in features in your learning management system for headings and alternative text and so forth. And so that's what I would recommend, to go that way. I've never had anybody complain about not having the PDF. On our website, we provide, on the Do It website, we have a lot, probably 100 handouts. They're all in HTML, and so I know they're accessible to anyone. We do know that some people want to use a PDF, and who does? Me. Why? Because in the olden days, when I used to go to conferences in person, I would like to have a handout so people could write in the margins. I'd make sure that everyone knew where to get an accessible version as well, by the way. But I would hand those out. And I want to use PDF because you can control the format a little bit better. But the key is the HTML version is the one that you get if you link for like that 20 tips document. And then you'll see a link to the PDF, which is usually the opposite way other people do it. The PDF, and then it's not based on who might want to use it. It's based on accessibility, that the HTML is fully accessible to everyone. And the other PDF we made it accessible, but there's some issues beyond our control, like the version of the software a person is using to access that PDF. If it's an older version, we may have done everything on our end, but they're not using the right product or something. And so anyway, so make the HTML the prominent one. Even in a syllabus in your online learning class, put that in the content management page, which is HTML. But you might want to have an attachment. And it could be a PDF, but I would encourage a Word document, which is what I do, because it's easier to update it and so forth and keep it accessible. But also the students can download it on their computer and they can edit it. Some people don't like that. I don't know why. But I like my students to edit the syllabus, take out the stuff that doesn't apply to them, like resources they're not going to use, add some things to my timeline, details that, this is a grandma's birthday, and so I need to get this done the day before. I don't know, but make it your own.